President Vladimir Putin ordered the 36-hour ceasefire from midday on Friday to observe Orthodox Christmas. Kyiv has said it has no intention to stop fighting, rejecting the purported truce as a stunt by Moscow to buy time to reinforce troops that have taken heavy losses this week. In the hours prior to the deadline, rockets slammed into a residential building in the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk close to the eastern front line, damaging 14 homes but with no casualties, the mayor said. Residents described several explosions. After hovering at around 10 degrees Celsius during an unseasonably warm spell since New Year, temperatures are now falling. Forecasters say they could soon plunge to -11 degrees Celsius in Kyiv and to -18 degrees Celsius in eastern Ukraine. Businesses and residents have bought tens of thousands of generators to ensure electricity supplies. Yaroslav Zelezniak, a parliamentary deputy, said on Telegram that 669,400 generators were imported into Ukraine in 2022, with deliveries peaking at 309,400 units in December. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko visited a military base where Russian troops are stationed, the defense ministry said on Friday. Belarus, which is closely allied with Moscow, said on Thursday that it would receive more weapons and equipment from Russia as the two boost their military cooperation, fueling fears it could be used as a staging post to attack Ukraine from the north. Minsk has said it will not enter the war in Ukraine, but Russia used Belarus as a launchpad for its February 24 full-scale invasion and continues to use Belarusian airspace for drone and missile strikes, Kyiv says. A new U.S. weapons package for Ukraine will include about 50 Bradley fighting vehicles, two U.S. officials said on Thursday, with one of them saying the package will be worth roughly $2.8 billion, €2.64 billion. On Wednesday, President Joe Biden said that sending the Bradleys, a U.S. Army mainstay, to Ukraine was being considered to help fight Russia's invasion. Russia's ambassador accused the United States of plotting a dangerous course. Late last month, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told the U.S. Congress that the tens of billions of dollars of aid it had approved to help Ukraine combat the Russian invasion was not charity but an investment in global security. The United States has sent about $21.3 billion, €20 billion, in security assistance to Kyiv. The size of Friday's security aid package was not immediately clear. The White House declined to comment. Russia's ambassador in Washington said the Bradleys' decision showed Moscow's U.S. interlocutors have not even tried to listen to our numerous calls to take into account possible consequences of such a dangerous course. Ambassador Anatoly Antonov, in comments published in Russian and English on the Facebook page of the Russian embassy, said there could be no more talk of weapons transfers being of a defensive nature. The United States has increasingly sent more capable weapons to Ukraine. As the war progressed and Ukraine's needs changed, more complex weapons systems, including high-mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS, and National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, NASAMS, were shipped to Kyiv. Most recently, Washington pledged to send a Patriot missile system to repel Russian missile and drone attacks. Training and other logistics still need to be worked out. The United States is of the view that Russian President Vladimir Putin's ally Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the founder of Russia's most powerful mercenary group, is interested in taking control of salt and gypsum from mines near the Ukrainian-held city of Bakhmut, a White House official said on Thursday. Washington has previously accused Russian mercenaries of exploiting natural resources in the Central African Republic, Mali, Sudan, and elsewhere to help fund Moscow's war in Ukraine, a charge Russia rejected as anti-Russian rage. Prigozhin, who has been sanctioned by Western countries for his role in Wagner, bade farewell on Thursday to former convicts who had served out their contracts in Ukraine and urged them to avoid the temptation to kill when back in civilian life. Out of its force of nearly 50,000 mercenaries, Wagner has sustained over 4,100 killed and 10,000 wounded, including over 1,000 killed between late November and early December near Bakhmut, the U.S. official said on Thursday. The White House said late last month that the Wagner Group took delivery of an arms shipment from North Korea to help bolster Russian forces in Ukraine, a sign of the group's expanding role in that conflict. The United States will provide more than $3.75 billion in military assistance to Ukraine and countries affected by the Russian invasion of its neighbor, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced on Friday. Blinken said in a statement that Washington will provide Ukraine with Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, self-propelled howitzers, armored personnel carriers, surface-to-air missiles, ammunition, and other items to support Ukraine. The package makes the largest use, $2.8 billion, of the Presidential Drawdown Authority, PDA, since Russia's invasion last February, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said. That authority allows the United States to transfer defense items like Humvees, trucks, and munitions from stocks quickly without congressional approval in response to an emergency. The aid includes mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs, guided multiple launch rocket systems, GMLRs, surface-to-air missiles, anti-vehicle land mines and ammunition, Jean-Pierre said. RIM-7C Sparrow missiles, used for air defense, will also be sent to Ukraine. The missiles will be launched from Buk launchers, a Soviet-era weapons system that Ukraine is using. Laura Cooper, Deputy Under-Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia, told reporters at the Pentagon, "It is a creative solution that did require some engineering finesse to have the Soviet launcher work with a missile produced by U.S. companies Raytheon Technologies Corp. And General Dynamics Corp." Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has stressed the need for better air defenses to curb Russian missile strikes that have damaged the country's energy infrastructure during winter. The United States and Germany have also pledged to send Patriot missile systems to repel Russian missile and drone attacks. This particular PDA package, and the Bradley fighting vehicles, are very significant in terms of being able to do what we call combined arms maneuver warfare, said John Kirby, spokesperson for the White House National Security Council. The armored Bradley has a powerful gun and has been used regularly by the U.S. Army to carry troops around battlefields since the mid-1980s. The Army has thousands of Bradleys. The United States plans to send about 50. In addition to the weapons, the aid included $225 million in foreign military financing to help Ukraine build and modernize its military, Jean-Pierre said. She said the package also included an additional $682 million for regional partners and allies on NATO's eastern flank to encourage those that have sent weapons to Ukraine to supply more. The U.S. funds can be used to help them buy replacement equipment. The Pentagon is for the first time sending Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine, as well as nearly 300 other armored vehicles as part of a new aid package that will coincide with a new training program for Kiev's forces. The Bradleys, as well as American-supplied Patriot surface-to-air missile systems, M113 armored personnel carriers, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, known as MRAPs, and Humvees, are part of what defense officials said is the largest Ukraine security aid package yet, worth $2.85 billion. The new combined arms and joint maneuver training is slated to begin within a couple of weeks in Germany and will train roughly a battalion of Ukrainian troops, around 500 each month, Brig General Pat Ryder, the Pentagon's top spokesman, told Military.com during a briefing to the press on Thursday. The Pentagon said no additional troops are expected to be deployed to Europe for the training. Before the Russian invasion last year, the U.S. provided years of training and security aid to Kiev, including placing American troops in Ukraine, escalating in 2015 in the hopes of fending off further aggression by Moscow. U.S. trainers evacuated the country ahead of last year's Russian attack. Cooper said the combined arms training will help the Ukrainians integrate all of their battlefield capabilities and better maneuver to push back the Russian positions in the east and the south of the country, where heavy fighting has concentrated since Russia abandoned its plans to capture the capital Kiev. U.S. troops in Germany, as well as other ally nations, have been providing training on the various weapons systems, which have included Javelin missiles, newly unveiled Phoenix Ghost explosive drones, and the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, or HIMARS. The new U.S. training will also be provided for the Bradleys. France announced Wednesday it is sending AMX-10RC armored fighting vehicles to Ukraine, and a day later Germany said it is contributing Marder infantry fighting vehicles. The tally of U.S. weapons sent to Ukraine is growing long, equaling a total of $22 billion worth of hardware and equipment since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion on February 24, 2022. The decision to give Bradleys to Ukraine comes as the war has turned into a brutal grind during the winter, and the Ukrainians have managed to keep the Russian forces on their heels by clawing back some territory and pulling off a missile strike on a Russian base this month that killed at least 63. Cooper said the Pentagon expects Russia to attempt to gain back territory, and the Bradleys could allow the Ukrainians to move more effectively around the battlefield when countering any offensive. Bradleys are often used in conjunction with heavier armor, deploying in what are known as hunter-killer teams where the smaller, less armored, but more mobile Bradleys reconnoiter targets than direct tanks to destroy them. The U.S. package included 45 T-72B tanks, a Soviet main battle tank also used by the Russians, though officials did not specifically say they would be married to the accompanying Bradleys on the battlefield. The US uses the M1A2 Abrams tank, a formidable piece of armor that is on the Ukrainians' shopping list. The Bradley is not a tank, despite a common misconception based on its tracks, armor, and weapon system. Military.com spoke to 4 senior instructors at the Army's Bradley Functional Courses, schools at Fort Benning, Georgia, that teach American officers and non-commissioned officers the art of Bradley fighting. The platform boasts 3 different weapon systems. Sergeant First Class Daniel Gopner, the Bradley Master Gunner senior instructor, said, a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun, a 25mm Bushmaster chain gun, and a tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided missile system, known as a TOW. It typically takes the Army about 5 weeks to train leaders how to operate, maintain and use the Bradleys, a time frame akin to what the Ukrainians are expected to have. The Pentagon said it's sending 50 Bradleys to Ukraine, about 1/3 of what is typically in an American Armored Brigade combat team. The new aid package includes 250,000 rounds of 25mm ammunition for the Bushmaster and 500 TOW missiles. Though the Bradley has been in the American arsenal for more than 40 years, if it sees direct combat against Russian troops, it could be the first for the platform in a conventional conflict since the First Gulf War. On January 5, Ukrainian forces conducted a strike on a temporary base of Russian troops in Havrylivka Drua, a village in Kherson Oblast near the Russia-occupied Crimean Peninsula, the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces reported on January 6. Currently, it is known that up to 100 wounded Russian soldiers were brought to local hospitals, the General Staff said, adding that the number of killed Russian troops is being clarified. Over the last 24 hours, the Ukrainian Air Force struck a Russian personnel base, while Ukraine's rocket and artillery forces hit 2 other Russian personnel and military equipment concentration areas over the past day, the General Staff said, without providing further details. Earlier on January 5, the General Staff also said that Ukraine's forces launched 20 attacks on the areas of concentration of Russian troops. On January 3, a Ukrainian strike on Russian-occupied Tokmak in Zaporizhia Oblast killed and wounded 80 Russian soldiers, according to the General Staff. The attack comes after hundreds more Russian mobilized soldiers were reported to have been killed in a Ukrainian strike on a school building in occupied Makiyivka in Donetsk Oblast on the evening of December 31. Unlike with other similar strikes, the Russian Defense Ministry acknowledged the attack in Makiyivka, but said that only 89 soldiers had been killed. Ukraine will need at least $1.79 billion to restore its telecommunications sector to pre-war levels, a UN agency said in a report published on Friday alleging Russia had destroyed completely or seized networks in parts of the country. The long-anticipated and sensitive damage assessment by the Geneva-based International Telecommunication Union, ITU, was commissioned in April to assess the extent of destruction of Ukraine's communication networks as a result of Russia's invasion last February. The report, which covers the first 6 months of the war, found that there was considerable damage and destruction to communications infrastructure in more than 10 out of 24 regions of Ukraine. It also alleges that Moscow unilaterally switched Ukrainian dialing codes, fixed by the UN agency, to Russian ones and that there had been 1,123 cyber attacks against Ukraine. An official with the Russian diplomatic mission in Geneva dismissed the report's allegations, saying they were designed to divert attention from unspecified atrocities committed by Ukraine on Russian-occupied territory. Russia has regularly targeted Ukraine with cyber attacks since its annexation of Crimea in 2014. These attacks, perpetrated against government and banking websites, intensified before Moscow sent troops into Ukraine last year. Russia has denied being behind those and other attacks. Danilov divided the war into 4 stages and noted the main weapons that the Allies were supplying to Ukraine for each stage. January 2022, guerrilla war, the NLAW anti-tank missiles, the Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, the Javelin anti-tank missiles. June 2022, defensive and counteroffensive war, the HIMARS multiple launch rocket system, the M777 howitzer, the Harpoon missiles, the GMLRS projectiles, Excalibur, the PZH-2000 self-propelled gun, the Iris self-propelled gun, the Caesar self-propelled howitzer, the Crab self-propelled howitzer. 2023, offensive war, the Bradley and Marder infantry fighting vehicles, the Bastion armored personnel carrier, the AMX-10 RC armored vehicles or wheeled tanks, the Patriot air defense system, and much more, less public and not public at all. According to the official, the 4th stage will be a war of justice and retribution. Recent days have seen Ukraine's allies for the first time promise to supply Ukraine with weapons of the types Ukraine's generals say they need to defeat Russia and liberate all of Ukraine's territory. Following talks between the Ukrainian and French presidents Volodymyr Zelensky and Emmanuel Macron on January 4, France agreed to provide Ukraine with AMX-10RC armored vehicles, which are sometimes classified as wheeled tanks, the first instance of armored vehicles of this type being transferred to Kiev. France will also supply Bastion armored vehicles to Ukraine. On January 5, following talks between U.S. President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the United States and Germany announced that they would transfer the Marder and Bradley infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine. Berlin will also transfer an additional Patriot air defense battery to Ukraine, on top of the one Washington pledged back in December 2022. Kherson was attacked by the Russian army 14 times. The residential quarters of the city of Kherson came under enemy fire. Enemy shells hit a fire station, private houses and apartment buildings, he wrote. As a result of Russian shelling across the region, 6 people died during the day, and 4 more sustained injuries of varying degrees of severity. Among the dead is a 12-year-old boy, who was killed by the enemy together with his family during the Russian shelling of Berislav, a town on the right bank of the Dnipro River in Kherson Oblast. Invading Russian forces in Ukraine have regularly attacked the liberated part of Kherson Oblast since retreating across the Dnipro River in early November. The Russians shell liberated towns in the oblast from positions across the Dnipro. Russian forces held most of Kherson Oblast for about 9 months, before being forced to retreat by a Ukrainian army offensive in the south of the country. Earlier, Ukraine launched a lightning counteroffensive in Kharkiv Oblast in the northeast of the country, liberating most of the region in a matter of a few days. Meanwhile, in early October Russia launched a campaign to destroy Ukraine's civilian infrastructure with missiles and suicide drones. The Kremlin hopes that by denying Ukrainian civilians heating, power and water during winter, the government in Kyiv will come under pressure to seek a ceasefire. Finland is ready to provide Ukraine with Leopard 2 battle tanks if Europe gives it the green light, Antti Häkkinen, chairman of the Defense Committee in Finland, said, Finnish MTV Uutiset News reports. If Europe starts giving tanks to Ukraine even an inch more, Finland should be involved. Of course, with our small contribution, because our own defense capability is always a priority for us as a border country with Russia, Häkkinen said. The United States and Germany announced on January 5 that the U.S. would provide Ukraine with 50 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles worth $2.8 billion, while Germany approved a shipment of its Marder infantry fighting vehicles. Earlier on January 4, French President Emmanuel Macron announced the decision to supply Ukraine with light tanks and Bastion armored fighting vehicles. Germany aims to deliver as many as 40 combat vehicles and a Patriot air defense system to Ukraine by the end of March as part of an effort to help the government in Kyiv in the event fighting intensifies in the spring. The government in Berlin announced late Thursday in a joint statement with the U.S. that it will supply Ukraine with Marder infantry fighting vehicles, as well as the Patriot. The U.S. will contribute Bradley fighting vehicles, providing a significant upgrade in firepower in the fight against Russia's invasion along with similar armored AMX-10RCs, France pledged on Wednesday. Chancellor Olaf Scholz held a phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, promising steadfast solidarity with Kyiv as his government continues its support in 2023, putting Germany's total aid last year at €12 billion, $12.7 billion, according to a statement. The German leader was praised by domestic allies for the move, although some said it should have come much sooner and urged the government to supply even heavier kit, such as NATO-grade Leopard 2 battle tanks. The Russian embassy in Berlin condemned Germany's decision, saying on Friday that it will seriously affect German-Russian relations and calling it a further step towards escalation of the conflict. Scholz's chief spokesman Stefan Hebestreit said Friday that Germany and its allies had been discussing the latest arms shipment for several weeks. The U.S. has been pushing European allies to send more heavy weapons to Ukraine because it wants to enable the army there to regain as much territory as possible before any negotiations with Russia, according to a senior German government official, who asked not to be identified discussing confidential policy details. Overall, Germany has been one of the most generous supporters of Ukraine, sending billions of euros in financial support and humanitarian aid alongside military equipment. The list of kit includes 30 Gepard armored anti-aircraft vehicles, 14 self-propelled howitzers, the Iris-T air defense missile system and 5 Mars-2 multiple rocket launchers. A quarter of German voters believe the government should be doing more to help Ukraine's military, according to the latest Infratus DIMAP poll for ARD conducted January 2 to 4. However, a slightly higher proportion, or 26%, think that the support already goes too far, while just over 40% consider it appropriate at the current level. The armies of the LNR and DNR, sham republics that Ukraine describes as terrorist organizations, were officially integrated into the Russian armed forces on December 31, and Kremlin dictator Vladimir Putin presented these formations with their battle colors during a visit to Rostov. The agency noted that Russia had declared the DNR and LNR to be its territories after holding sham referendums in September 2022. The status and identity of the occupied territories still cause disagreements in the Russian system. Even before the February 2022 invasion, these territories represented a significant drain on Russian finances, the report goes on. Now the Kremlin has overtly committed to supporting them, they will likely constitute a large political, diplomatic and financial cost for Russia which will last well beyond the current phase of the conflict.